I'm so excited to have this discussion today about power and politics with this brilliant group of strategists, researchers, innovators. My name is Katrina Gamble. I am the CEO of Southern Strategies, a social impact consulting firm. Woo-hoo. And I have joining me here today Inse Ufat, organizer, civic leader extraordinaire. Woo. Terrence Woodbury with Hit Strategies, leading polling firm, and Jess Morales-Roqueto with Ekis, #1 firm doing research on Latinx folks in the United States or at all. So before we jump into the whole conversation, we want to show a short video that just kind of grounds you all in the problem that we're facing and how we as a community of people have started grappling with addressing that problem.
73% of Black voters said they felt very powerful when they voted in 2020. And today, that number has dropped to 43%. It's because the day after Election Day, they stopped hearing from politicians.
And with the sophisticated nature of our organizing and groups like ours, we've been at this since January 6th. Georgia voters know that their vote is powerful. Georgia voters know that the only way to neutralize the impact of these trash anti-voting bills is to show up in overwhelming numbers.
The Democracy and Power Innovation Fund, hosted at the Rockefeller Family Fund, is a community of organizers, researchers, and aligned funders with the goal of building a durable, progressive, multiracial democracy in the United States.
So as you saw from that video, we are all a part of a community of folks who are interested in not just turning people out to vote, but actually doing the work of building power in Black and Latinx communities. And what that means is investing in understanding those communities. In the traditional status quo political industry, people have spent millions and millions of dollars, actually millions and millions of dollars every cycle, investing in research to understand all kinds of subsections of white voters, from the soccer mom to Joe the plumber. We need that same level of investment in communities of color. And so we have all come together, bringing our different expertise to really dig into not only understanding the differences within communities of color, but also like the messages, the ways in which we move them around values and identity, not just to turn out to vote, but actually to help folks engage and build power. And so to kick us off, I really want to start with you, Inse, because I know you have been on the ground, doing the work, building things in Georgia, in a state where there's been not one, not two, but like 3 elections, back to back, highly visible, where you had to really tap into and talk to young voters, Black and brown voters, and like move them from this place of hopelessness or cynicism to actually taking action. So I would love for you to kick us off and share a little bit about what you're hearing as some of the major challenges that we're facing around that.
Yes, and thank you, Katrina. I think one of the things that I think it's important to highlight is like the uniqueness of like a state-based power building group or a local group versus a national organization. I think that New Georgia Project's role as a state-based power group is really important. When we think about public policy and like where it is made laws and where it is made these trash laws that are meant to like limit our opportunities and interfere with the kind of lives that our families can lead, they're happening in state legislatures. I mean, because if we keep it really, really honest with ourselves, like the worst instincts are continuously manifesting itself in Congress, but they don't have the ability to actually move and destroy in the ways in which we're seeing state legislatures function. And so I think that one of the key parts of our organizing, the key parts of our partnerships with the DPI Fund and with folks like Hit Strategies is being really clear about identifying the problem, not investing in solutions to problems that don't actually exist while we ignore the problems that go at the heart of the things that ail us and our communities. I would tell you that Georgia's going to be the first state in the Deep South with a white minority minority, that people of color are about to be, there's a plurality or the majority by 2025, very, very soon. But what I will tell you also is that demographics do not automatically equal destiny. And so just the fact that like Black and brown people are gonna make up the majority of Georgians in 2 years doesn't in any way guarantee us the things that we actually need for our families, that we actually need for ourselves. It doesn't actually address the Black maternal mortality rate. It doesn't actually address the weakness of our electoral system or the weakness of our state parties, right? That we need to build power, and in the most simple definition that everyone in our organization, inside and outside, can wrap their heads around, it's power to stop bad things from happening to us and power to shape and bring about the world that we feel like our families deserve to live in. And so understanding who we are, what moves our folks to action feels really important. And there's no such thing as a voter of color. That's my hot take. I'm gonna say it over and over again, but we could talk about that later.
I'm actually so glad you said that. And I had so much angst about the title to this panel, but the character limit forced me to use BIPOC instead of Black and Latinx because I was running out of space. But yes, we should not be smushing ourselves. Right. We are different, 100%. And like Terrence, I know y'all have done tons of focus groups with like black voters. I'm like curious if you have any insights that you want to share. It's like, what are like some of the things that you see as like the driving things that are like preventing people from wanting to be engaged?
Absolutely, and so at Hit Strategies, we have tried to do exactly what Nse has described here, that is to disaggregate voters of color, to understand and name and respect the diversity amongst voters of color. And to do that, we've conducted over 200 focus groups, over 70 polls with what we call the emerging electorate. And that's important because we're not making strategy based on a snapshot, based on a single poll done one time, but instead keeping our finger on the pulse, going into these communities regularly, in fact, never leaving them. And so one thing that I heard in Florida, and why it's so important to export the strategies that have worked in Georgia, in fact, to export Nse as far as we can, as far and as wide as we can, is because while Georgia will be the first minority state in the union, that diversity is happening across the South. It's happening in the Sun Belt, and so we have to be able to capitalize on that. And so in Florida, where we have seen demographic shift, not equal destiny, I was in focus groups a month before the election, and I was told by a young Black man there that his hood had not gotten any better under Obama, and it hadn't gotten any worse under Trump. And so what do any of these presidents got to do with me? And for those closest to the pain, the messages that we're using, the policies and the prescriptions that we are issuing, it's just not reaching them. And that's the gap that we have a moral and strategic imperative to close.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. It's like so poignant. And Jess, for you, before we kind of jump into the research and the data, I'm like curious if you have anything to add too about this idea of political cynicism, the things that are like happening that make people feel like they don't want to take action, particularly like in the Latinx community from some of the work that you all have been doing with ECIS.
Yeah, I'll just start out just to like get this out of the way. I'll use the term Latinx, Latina, Latino interchangeably, Hispanic in this conversation because people can call themselves what they like to be called, just so that I don't have to answer that question later on in the panel. At ECIS, we work to understand the Latino electorate, and one of the things that we know about the Latino electorate is it's definitely still emerging. Latinos are they have the potential to become the second largest voting bloc in the country, but our participation lags well behind our Black counterparts and is much closer to our API counterparts than we would imagine it would be given our population size. And that really matters in the context of Latinx voters because there's nothing, socioeconomic factors, demographic factors do not explain why that is the case. So that means we really need to work hard to uncover what that's about. Where's that coming from? And I think one thing that is similar is, like Terrence, I have a million stories of people who are like, this has nothing to do with me. And not only does it not have anything to do with me, I'm also not convinced that I matter, that my vote matters, that any behavior that I may have or not have, voting or not voting, being a Democrat or a Republican, supporting a candidate or not supporting a candidate, will do anything.
Can I correct myself really quick?
Yeah,
before we
go
move
for
on?
it.
I just want to reflect, I said Georgia is going to be the first state in the Deep South, not in the country. So right now we have California and we have Texas. And the thing that's exciting about the demographic shift, because it's not just Georgia, it's Arizona, right? North Carolina, is that these states have an opportunity to choose, right? That if California is a state where white people are the minority and Texas is a state where white people are the minority, and really it's about organizing and the power that you have to determine the public policy environment, the political environment that you have. And so Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Mississippi, all of these states right now are writing their future. And that's why the demographic information is that important. It's just really accelerated in Georgia because we have about 18 months before that flip happens.
Right. Thank you for adding that.
Come on, specificity. Okay.
That's what we're all about here.
People keep
The nuances. The nuances.
People keep having babies. Like,
Right. It's a real thing. I mean,
and they banned abortion at 6 weeks.
Right. And I
Inappropriate.
to this point, right, and we talk about political cynicism, and like everything that y'all are talking about, I mean, the breakdown of that political cynicism, what it really is about is whether or not people feel like they have power. Mm-hmm. Do they feel like their vote has power? Do they feel like their community has power to change things? And if they don't feel like they have that sense of power, then it can lead to hopelessness, inaction. And to some of the points you, like Terrence made and things like that, that cynicism is based in reality for a lot of folks, for like institutions not showing up for them. So it's not that that is irrational, but it's like, how do we not get stuck there? Like, how do we move past that? And so, and I know, Terrence, y'all at Hit Strategies have really kind of dug into this idea of a power shift. How do we move people from feeling powerless to powerful, and the work to people feeling like they don't want to do anything to actually taking action. So I would love to toss it to you to kind of like walk through some of like the research and the data and top lines from that.
Absolutely. So, we have started digging into these gaps, the gaps within the Black community. And the first thing that we started to observe were the gender and generation gaps. It's a lot of data up there. I'm going to talk you through it, I promise. So the first gap here is the gender gap. And while it is true that there is a gender gap across all voters, in every community, women vote more than men. That gap is much more pronounced amongst Black voters, where the gender gap is 12%, almost twice as much as it is across some of the other diverse communities. And the same gap exists amongst, in the generational gap. Again, older voters just vote more than younger voters. That is true across all communities. But as you see here, that gap is once again more pronounced amongst younger Black people. And so we had to start understanding, getting under there to figure out why that is. On the next slide, you see this is the foundation of all of this work. Is this thing that we observed in 2020, specifically in our work with NSAE in Georgia, and that was the correlation between perceptions of power and political participation. What does that mean? We started asking the question, regardless of how often you vote, how much power does your vote have to make a difference in your community? The higher they rate that power, the higher their likelihood to vote. It seems like common sense, but the ability to empirically measure that means that we could then measure the shift in that power, measure the impact of our interventions. Not just is it more likely that they will tell us that they're going to vote, but is it actually making them feel more powerful? And so in 2020, 73% of Black voters in Georgia said they felt extremely powerful. Well, 1 year later, we saw that drop by almost 30 points. And that drop is because of the withdrawal from the end of campaigns, the end of political communication, the end of engagement. And so by 2022, what do we have to do? Dig ourselves out of that power hole. And we started to rebuild that power in the Black community. But what is much easier is just sustaining it. as opposed to because it is it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once we withdraw, they feel less engaged, they feel less powerful, and when we come back, they call our bullshit. They say, you're just here for my vote and you're not here to help me. And they're not wrong. This is where the cynicism becomes realism. And so how do we maintain that power throughout the year? It is by moving through this cycle of power, moving them from just electoral power, that the only power they have is the power to vote and the power to elect people, to what we see here is also negotiating power, the power to move elected officials closer to their position. They have accountability power. We also refer to this as protest power. And that is the power to hold elected officials accountable, to protest them, to lobby them when they're not doing what they promise. And then finally, and this is the one that we found a lot of young people really, really like, and that is punitive power. The power to fire people that don't do what you want them to do. That expression of power goes far beyond Election Day and allows them to stay engaged and to continue to exercise the power that they felt in 2020. And so what do we need to do? The first thing we have to do is move beyond just these demographic observations, move beyond just the gender and generation gap and start understanding the values that make some black voters participate more than others. What do they feel? What do they believe? What do they know that makes some of them participate more than others? Well, to do that, we had to disaggregate, create these clusters. We found in this clustering exercise that there are 5 types of black voters. The first is the legacy civil rights voter. They make up 30% of the electorate. These are my favorite. I always say black seniors. You're not supposed to have favorites. Black seniors are my favorite because we know they're going to vote and we know who they're going to vote for every single time. They understand the assignment. The next are the aspirational activists. This is 13% of the electorate. This voter is much younger. They are millennial and Gen X, not Gen Z. This is where we have to disaggregate even young people, right? Gen Z is not like millennial, is not like Gen X. Well, in this aspirational activist is where we find black millennials and black Gen X that are also the highest per capita income, highest educational attainment, and they self-report that they vote in every election when in fact they think they do, and they really, really, really want to. Right, but they're missing some information. The next two, the next gen optimists and the rightfully cynical, again is where we start to find some of the young people. Next gen optimists, they have high perceptions of power. They like Democrats a lot, but this is the do no harm cluster. If they don't know the candidates, then they're not going to cast a vote that might in fact hurt their community. So to do no harm, they just withdraw. And then the rightfully cynic, well, this is the young black man in Florida who said his hood didn't get any better under Obama and any worse under Trump. This is the lowest economic attainment, lowest educational attainment. This is who I call closest to the power. Closest to the pain. This is who that rightfully cynical voter, in most cases non-voter, is they don't like Democrats, they don't like Republicans, they swing in and out of the election, in and out of the electorate, but they're also likely to swing from party to party because they don't believe either of them is that committed. And then finally is the race-neutral conservative. This is a much smaller part of the black electorate, only 7%, but as we know, we have seen Republican share of black votes double in the past 8 years. And that is both a combination of the race-neutral conservative who actually believes this shit. They are an ideologue, right? They are conservative ideologue, and more of the rightfully cynical that are being convinced to swing from one party to the other. And so understanding this is the first step, and then we have to figure out the different interventions and different messages as opposed to applying the same GOTV strategy to all black voters.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, and one of the things whenever I see this slide for me that is so striking is the fact that the legacy civil rights group is 30%, but the rightfully cynical is 29%. And like those are the folks that we are like leaving off the board. So anyway, I really appreciate you kind of breaking down that we're not a monolith. There are differences. Those differences mean real things in terms of how we talk to folks.
That's exactly right.
And so now I want to like shift it to you, Jess. Like we just kind of talked about the diversity within the Black community. Similarly within the Latinx community, huge levels of diversity on lots of different kind of cut points. And then even among like strategists, like there's all different kind of conflicting information about like what are the right ways to actually take advantage of the opportunity of like moving, increasing civic participation among Latinx voters, or like moving non-voters to becoming voters. And so I know Ekis did this massive value survey to kind of really dig into this. And so I would love to toss it over to you to talk us through a little bit of that as well.
Yes, I think one of the most important things to know, there we go. I'm going to make definitive statements here because I think a lot of times people make statements about Hispanic voters that are mostly about conventional wisdom and less about actual data and information, which we have about us. So there's no need to rely on that kind of old information anymore. So definitive statement number one, Latino voters are not low information voters. In fact, I gotta be honest with you, I've never met a low information voter. People have tons of information about themselves and what they care about. What they may not have information about is a couple of things: the political process, political parties, political candidates, but that's frankly not on the voter. That's on the candidate, the party, the institution. So I think that's very, very important because we often hear that the reason Black and brown voters don't turn out is because they don't have enough information or they're not partisan enough. And I'll get into partisan a little bit. I think that's like kind of nuanced actually. But that I think matters a lot. We're incredibly high information. The second thing that's really important, and I think that's what I want to really convey in this slide here, is Latino voters are the swingiest voters that exist in the American electorate right now. So it's very much up for grabs whether or not Latino voters will remain Democratic stalwarts, as they basically have for all of the amount of time we've been able to vote in this country, or if we will see a shift over to a more conservative Latino electorate. If you look at the numbers right now, Latinos are about a third, which makes them similar to every other electorate in the country, except for Black people who are extremely pro-Democrats and always have been. And the reason that I say that is if you look at sort of the media landscape right now, it'll have you believe like every Hispanic voter is a Republican, and that's just not true. It'll also have you believe that like every Latino voter is becoming a Republican, also not true. There is one place where Latino voters are becoming Republican, and that's Florida. That is the place. If you just take Florida out, overwhelmingly Latino voters are Democratic, but in Florida, that's not the case. So this is very important because when you add Florida back in, there are a lot of voters. A huge amount of voters, and that's where a lot of this swinginess kind of comes from. That matters a lot, not only, of course, in the, Florida looms large in the firmament of Democratic politics, but also what influence Latino voters are seen as having in the American electorate. And influence, as we'll talk about next, is an extremely important indicator of behavior from any type of voter. Next slide. So let's talk about these clusters because I think let's talk about this first, this bottom part. A low sense of influence to a high sense of influence. So what does that mean? Your political influence is whether or not you believe your vote matters. In this case, it's my vote. This is like how people identified influence in our surveys. My vote has the power to make change on issues that are important to me. So this is something I think it's really critical between Terrence and I. It's about power. It's about also individual sense of power and authority as well as group sense of power and authority. And that is incredibly important because voting, as you probably all know, is an incredibly personal choice. You go into the voting booth and you make choices. But it's also about your group sense of power and influence. Are Black voters influential? Are Latina voters influential? Are women influential? Whatever whatever your like group affinity is when you go into the voting booth. And in this case, we have folks who are less likely to vote are also less likely to have a high sense of influence. AKA, if you believe that your vote matters, you're more likely to vote or be likely to vote, which is kind of a no-brainer, but is, you would think, and yet we see all the time that that doesn't necessarily translate into actually doing the work to motivate and very importantly for Hispanic voters, instill confidence. So I think that's where this kind of political, unassimilated, and uninterested sense comes in, which is there's uninterested, those are folks who are just checked out of politics. They don't think politics matters, they don't really care about politics, and they don't think it's relevant to their lives. Then there is politically unassimilated folks. These are people who are incredibly high information. They probably actually know a lot about what's going on, but nobody is talking to them. The party may not be talking to them, either party. The media may not be talking to them, any type of media. Candidates are probably not talking to them, maybe even actively disengaging with them because they might be seen as like a liability. Those folks are what we would call not integrated into the political system. And that political integration is a very important sense of whether or not you may or may not vote. i.e., if you feel like somebody cares about you and they're talking to you, that's gonna make you more likely to go out and vote, which again, seems like a no-brainer, and yet. Okay, so then we have this like last piece, which is about alienation and cynics. Those things are different. So alienated voters feel like they are othered. For Latinx voters, that is very, very important because unlike many black voters, although not all black voters, and also important to say black voters include Latinx voters because Afro-Latinos exist, we have a citizenship piece to conquer, which most African-American voters do not have. That matters because what we know about Latino voters and Latinos in general in this country is we have what we like to call a guest complex, which is regardless of if you're a citizen, regardless of how long you become a citizen, regardless of how long your family has been here, you feel othered in this country. You feel like you do not belong. And that's really important because that's true for, it depends on what side of the family you're talking about, but I'm second or fourth generation, depending on who you're counting. That means that my family's been here for literally hundreds of years, and my family still feels like we don't belong. And then you also have first generation voters, people who just came here, who also feel like they don't belong, regardless of citizenship. So you have to cross this othering to actually get people to vote. Then we have the cynics, and those are just people who are extremely skeptical. I don't think this matters. I don't think anybody is going to make a difference in my life. I haven't seen anybody make a difference in my life. And people keep telling me that if I do this, things will change. Nothing changed. So why do I care what you have to say? That is bad. We want people to feel like they matter. We want people to feel like their behavior makes a difference. But I think the thing that's actually really critical here is people are not necessarily against voting or against the voting process or against making change. Everybody wants to feel powerful, but it's about what bridge do we have to cross to make sure that people feel like they belong and feel like they have influence. Once we can do those two things, we'll make that kind of change that we're looking for.
And I love, I don't love it, but maybe that's why we put it in our title, that this issue around cynicism is real. Mm-hmm. And in both instances, it's based on some real things. And I know we've thrown a lot of research and data at folks for the researchers in us.
We're nerds. We're
nerding out on the
I
data.
just have to guess though, if you're here, you might be too. So.
Right, but the research is done in service of actually creating program and doing things to move people. So I really want to shift us to you and say, how do you take, you guys worked with his strategies, how do you take the research that Terrence's team did and actually translate it into program that moves people to take action?
I think that this partnership is literally the platonic ideal. And so being humble enough to know that just because you're Black American doesn't make you an expert in Black American politics, Latino, et cetera, et cetera. And so taking the insights, and so we're about to show you a video that I'm very proud of. Virality is a weird metric. I won't derail this conversation by talking about that and its role, but what I will say is with all of the numbers and all of the subsection of types of Black voters that were identified through the research at Hit Strategies, two of the main themes for our messaging were power and information. That despite all of the crazy, weird, noisy environments, the disinformation from foreign bad actors, we used to joke like, is it the Russians or the Republicans? Like, whatever. The point is that the theme, the messages around that centered, when we were talking to young Black voters, and Black voters are trying to move into action, talking about how powerful they were, talking about how powerful the vote was, but then also being seen as a credible source of information. Like, I'm here to get you to cut through the noise and tell you what you need to know about this moment right now, right? And like we prioritize that in our message because of the guidance that we got from Hit Strategies. And I'm really excited with the results. I mean, obviously we know the electoral results, but I'm also really proud of the creative process, right? That because of the discipline and the rigor, we were clear that we knew there was a message that would move people to action. So like, how do we deliver it in a way that's sticky and cuts through the noise? And I think we have in a video that's an example. We have two videos that are an example.
Inse, can you say just 2 seconds about who within like Black voters in Georgia this ad was like targeted at?
Absolutely. So, okay, in 2020, there was an extraordinary amount of hand-wringing, specifically about what Black men were gonna do when it came time to vote. Now, we now know that that was, in a lot of ways, anchored by a bunch of racism and like their continuous refusal to invest in actual research to understand this population. Even as we headed into 2022, there was this false narrative that Black men shifted their support from Trump from 2016 to 2020, and that was based on exit pollings and feelings, not facts. Because when there was the 50-state survey that was conducted basically a year after the 2020 elections, or almost 2 years after the 2020 elections, we saw that, much like the rest of the Progressive Coalition, everybody was like, not this fool again, right? Including Black men. And so I say all of that to say, because at the time, there was a lot of hand-wringing about whether or not Black men were the softest, squishiest part of the Progressive Coalition, and whether or not there needed to be extra love, attention, energy, investment in keeping them a part of the coalition, that we wanted to have smart things to say to Black men voters. Again, in the end, they performed at the same levels that we expected them to as the rest of the Progressive Coalition, but at the time everybody was like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? And so as an organization that was focused on Black civic engagement and youth civic engagement, we wanted to have a message to Black male voters, like under the age of 50, in Atlanta specifically. So this became a nationwide ad because a lot of people saw it, and some people were triggered by it, and other people were like, yes, and you will see why. And the point is that there was a very specific, here we go. Get your booty to the pole.
Get your booty to the pole, 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 yeah.
Did we get your attention? Good.
So, you really not gonna vote? You know it's more than just the president on the ballot, right? Check it.
A district attorney decides who to prosecute,
including whether or not to go after dirty cops.
Do you know who elects the DA? We do, but you don't want to vote.
Can't make it rain if you locked up on some bullshit.
Want trades and coding taught in our schools? Then vote for the school boards that will prepare us for the job market.
Want to end cash bail? Well, then vote for the sheriffs and county officials that feel the same way you do.
But you talking about, oh, they gonna pick who they gonna pick, shawty.
Ferguson just elected their first Black mayor.
You know how that happened?
It's clear Black lives don't matter to some of our current elected officials. If they matter to you, then don't let other people decide who's gonna run your community. Get your booty to the poll. Get your booty to the poll.
Get your booty to the poll.
Get your vote, vote, yeah, vote, vote, vote.
For information on how and where to vote, as well as resources to find out who's running where you live, go to getyourBootyToThePoll.com.
Drops mic.
And then there's a part 2, because 9 weeks later, as you can imagine, after the November 2020 general election, Black voters in Georgia did their thing, made Georgia a battleground state, et cetera. We got the outcomes that we got, and then 9 weeks later, there was a Senate race to determine the balance of power in the House and Senate, and so we ran it back.
Hello, and welcome to another Get Your Booty to the Poll public service announcement.
First of all, we want to thank you, brothers, for getting your booty to the poll during the November 3rd election. We had record voter turnout.
Making it rain ballots, y'all.
But it's not over yet. Georgia has a runoff election on January 5th for 2 Senate seats. We want you to know that it's not about who you vote for, it's what you vote for.
Want criminal justice reform?
What kind of judges do you want in our courts?
The Senate approves presidential appointments, like who runs the Department of Justice and the FBI.
The Senate approves federal judges, and that's a lifetime appointment, y'all.
Black lives matter to us. Want to know if Black lives matter to the candidates? Go to getyourBootyToThePoll.com to learn where they stand on issues that affect us.
And by us, we mean Black people.
So think about what you want, Georgia. And on January 5th, let's finish what we started.
Get your booty to the poll.
The Georgia Senate runoff is January 5th, and early voting starts December 14th. Let's finish what we started. For voter resources, go to getyourBootyToThePoll.com.
Vote, yeah, vote, stretch, yeah, vote, yeah, vote, stretch, vote.
Like nightlife is not the #1 economic engine that drives Atlanta and Atlanta culture, right? And so you can pretend and you can be upset and you can clutch your pearls, but we understand, we were having honest conversation about the things that drive culture with a particular group that we sought to engage, but not only just engage, but move to action. And so you can be an ideological purist, or you can, again, lean heavily into respectability politics, but we actually care about the impact that our campaigns are having, right? That we actually care about the power that we're trying to build. And so I would tell you that the lessons here were, one, continuing to lean into the message, the theme around power, that to the cynics, to the civil rights voters, et cetera, we did that. And we have the ability to do it again, right? It's super important. I think the second thing is, again, information, that we are a nonpartisan actor, that while we want people to participate in the elections, we don't represent a particular campaign. And again, it has never been about the who. It's less about what's happening in the White House and much more important about what's happening in your house. And we believe that. And that's just the sort of organizing theme around our external communications. And so, again, knowing our community, knowing what's hot, knowing what's moving people, and then challenging those assumptions with a rigorous research agenda so that you can push back against these fucking consultants who are grifters for the most part, and who profit handsomely from sending weak and ineffective messages to our communities. And then when the electoral results are what they are, they throw their hands up and be like, well, I told y'all Black people didn't vote.
Right.
I told you Latinos weren't citizens. I told you that Asian Americans were secret Republicans. I told you that women lie, right? And I told you that young people were unreliable, that they will continue to go back to the status quo and these sort of assumptions about political behavior, not actually rooted in fact.
Right. I mean, and that's the thing too. It's these assumptions, and it's also, and so then it's generic messages tossed at our communities, often at the last minute. And then to your point, right, when it doesn't turn out, it's well, okay, let's go spend billions of dollars doing the same thing that we've been doing. So I really appreciate you acknowledging that. And also, one of my favorite parts of the second video is when they're like, when we say we, I mean black people. It's like, just be specific.
And it's weird. It's super weird, but like
just naming that
just
who we're talking to.
It. Here's the thing.
I'm going to cut you off, though. I'm going to cut you off.
I don't trust people who whisper black, though. That's all.
Yeah. Not because I know you're not going to drop another gem, but I want to make sure we don't run out of time. So, and that was like obviously very specific to Georgia, and obviously you all targeted that message to a specific black voter in Atlanta. And so that's the thing, is the sophistication of not just like blanket, like this is what we need to do for this person in this particular geography, and like you built the program around that. And so I love that.
Rural treatments, suburban treatments, multicultural treatments.
Right. So I want to like turn to like kind of take us back wide for folks to kind of see what are some of the message frameworks that we've learned from the research that works. And I'll start with you, Terrence, and then we'll also want to like hear from you as well, Jess.
Absolutely. So, that is the power of data-informed messaging, right? We went through these clusters. We wouldn't show the strippers to the civil rights legacy voters, right? That's not the message for them. This also has to acknowledge, name, and respect that not all of these black voters are the same. And so there's not a message. It first has to consider who are you delivering it to. And so we have a couple of tenets of these messages that we know resonate. The first one is that progress is power. That we can't just tell them that we're making their lives better. We have to actually make their lives better. And we do that through what we call click here messaging, right? When we needed their votes, we put it in the palm of their hand. Click here to access your ballot. Click here to find your polling place. Click here to get 3 of your friends to vote. Click here to request your mail-in ballot. Well, now they need to click here to access a student loan forgiveness application. They need to click here to access the millions of jobs created by infrastructure. No, they're not going to find that shit in a press release from the White House. We have to deliver it to the palm of their hand and make their lives better. Not a message that says that we made their lives better. That's the first thing here, is that we gotta make their lives better. The second thing is that we must change the hero of the story. The hero of this story cannot be the government. It cannot be Joe Biden or Democrats or government or this party or the next party is saving you, because, again, when we think about who we need to mobilize here, they don't believe that there's a great white hope in Washington that shows up to work every day to save them, because there isn't. And so when we deliver a message that says, but Joe Biden has been doing, and give a laundry list of all the things that Biden has actually done. These are true things that he's actually gotten done. They call bullshit. This is the cynicism part, because they don't believe that he's there to save them. But what we do need to do is we have to tell us how our votes are making our lives better. We as the hero, we as the messenger. We also have to just explicitly declare power. And this is for black voters, Latino voters, young voters. All of these messages inserted the fact that you already have the power. You've already done it. We are the most powerful voters in Georgia. Young people are the biggest voting bloc in America, declaring that power so that they know it's there. And we also have to center joy and not just pain, right? When all of these black messages are about, black poverty rate and black unemployment and black crime and criminal justice and we dying and they killing us, and there was joy in those ads we just watched. And that joy is power. And finally, and this is where I started, we have to move beyond just political power, just electoral power, and move them through that entire cycle of power, the negotiating power, the accountability power, and their favorite, oftentimes, the punitive power to start firing people.
Thanks for that, Terrence. Jess, and I would love to just toss it to you too, like if there are kind of specific message frameworks that you all are learning from your research that are like really useful for Latinx voters?
Yeah, I think the important thing to say is people do need education about party and ideology. This matters a lot, not because you need to be a Democrat or you need to be a Republican, but because that's the way we talk about politics in this country is, are you a Democrat, are you a Republican? So if you don't know a lot about the parties, there isn't a lot of ways for you to get into the conversation. That matters wildly, not only in how the media covers, but how campaigns and institutions put their time and influence and money, but also in the way that people literally see themselves. And this is increasingly important with Hispanic voters because we are lower partisan than many others, and particularly important with younger Hispanic voters who are extremely low partisan compared to their older counterparts. And this is a big sea change that I think we also see in Black voters as well, which is that over time, it could be that this generation actually has the lowest partisan identity of any generation ever, in which case we will see a change not only kind of literally in who is in power and how they think about, but also whether or not they even identify with the two most anchoring political institutions that we have in this country. That will cause a seismic shift in the way that we think about politics over the next couple of years. So listen, parties can do what they want. They're allowed to spend their money the way that they want. But if they do not engage with low ideological, so people who would say, I don't really identify with either party. I don't really care about the Democrats or the Republicans. Then they risk losing an entire generation of people engaged in the political process.
In fact, Jess, if I could add to that,
Please.
Because that's spot on, this lower partisanship identity, but it's not only that they're saying they're not Democrats or Republicans, it's that they are saying they're independent, and that is their identity.
100%.
Independence isn't just not them, not the other party. Independence is their affiliation, and
Yes.
that is important to acknowledge.
And I think that independence is also different from their peers because it's not just like, it is literally I am independent,
That's right.
not just I'm an independent, yeah? And that's a big, big change. Okay, then there's this piece here which is about influence, and you'll note here that there's like a little bit of different, there's some factors that make you have a sense of influence or not. Whether or not you believe your vote has power. Do you remember being contacted by somebody? Are you really interested in politics? And the thing that I think is really important is one of the predictors of whether or not you have a sense of influence is whether or not you believe Latinos as a group have power and influence, not just you, but your own identity as a Latino and your sense of collective groupness. Now, this is really important because it's very in vogue in political circles these days to say all Latinos are different, and that's true. But Latinos are still more like each other than they are like anyone else.
That's right.
And so not only do we need to acknowledge the differences in Latino voters, Cuban voters in Florida are different than Venezuelans in Florida, which are different than Mexicans in California, which are different than Mexicans in Texas. Oh, by the way, Texas is a state that's the size of a country, so different types of Mexicans in Texas are different, right? Those are all true statements. And all Latino voters are still more similar to other Latinos than they are to literally anyone else. So that really matters. You have to, and this is hard, okay? I'm not trying to pretend like this is easy. To be like, you are a special snowflake, and also, you're part of a lot of special snowflakes, right? Like, it's just, so it's not, I don't want to let anybody off the hook here, and I also don't want to pretend like there's a reason we haven't figured this out yet, because it's really difficult to be able to do that in a 30-second video or a 5-second Facebook graphic, right? Okay, now, one place that is important that I think matters a lot is the sense of generational, and frankly, it's obligation and responsibility. So Latinos are among the most likely to say that a sense of family and history, wanting to honor the ancestors, wanting to honor the sacrifices, that comes up a lot, of our parents and grandparents, which is so beautiful and amazing. And also it's related to obligation and responsibility. When you feel a sense of obligation and responsibility to someone that is not you, that makes you behave in certain ways. And one of those ways is by like wanting to be a good person and like good people vote, right? So that, I think, is something that is very unique to us, but also, frankly, kind of a broad message. We're not the only ones who feel that way. A lot of people feel like that sense of responsibility. So this is a really, I think, interesting a message where you could be speaking to us directly, but also lots of people will find resonance with that message.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing that I love, the kind of connection between both your research, Jess, and like Terrence's team at HIT, is this idea around collective power. Because we've been talking about power, and there is this, individual power is incredibly important, but oftentimes, especially in US politics, people think about voting politics as this like singular, self-interested thing, but the reality is, for most of us, the thing that's moving people is wanting to have an impact on your community, wanting to have an impact for your family, want to honor your ancestors. And so it really is this kind of this collective power is also important and is something that can be tapped into if we're trying to like engage and like move folks. So I like just like taking moderator privilege to like draw that connection because I love it so much. And I wanna like see if we have time for questions, but before we do that, I wanna like give y'all a chance to make some last comments. This is why I didn't want to be in charge of the clicker. I'm bad at clicking. But just a lot of information here, tons of incredible insights. So if you were just going to leave folks in this room with like one major takeaway or recommendation for folks who are like really invested, committed into building, not just turnout voters, but really building power in Black and Latinx communities, like what's your one kind of recommendation takeaway? And start with you and move down.
Okay, I think it's important to listen to people and believe people that the cynicism comes from a real place, that, you know, that we should overcome the instinct to tell people like, oh, your vote really, really matters, et cetera, that we need to have the discipline and the respect for the audience that we are seeking to move to action, to know that essentially they have made a cost-benefit analysis for themselves, that essentially they're absolutely right, that the power of their one vote might not materially change their lives, but having an important conversation about collective action and collective power. And you're right, you can't do that in 30 seconds, and you can't do that on Halloween before the election the next week, right? And so again, having rigor in how you plan your messages and discipline in making sure that you go back to the well, that you go back to talk to the people that you're actually trying to move, and that you respect people enough to believe that they know what is best for them. And then you need to tailor your organizing, your messaging, your shift to respect and acknowledge and honor where people are as you seek to move them to where we're trying to be.
Yes. Terrence.
Yes, stop trying to find the silver bullet. Stop trying to find the message that's going to move Black people, because there isn't a Black voter or a Latino voter or a voter of color. That we do have to respect those differences. And then finally, don't just don't just come up with messages about making their lives better. Make their lives better.
Right, makes so much sense when you say that. Jess, I'll give you the last word before we open up for questions.
People know what they want and need. People deserve to get what they want and need. And the closer you can bring your work to what they want and need, the faster we're going to get the outcomes that we're looking for.
All right, thanks, y'all. All right, we have 5 minutes, so I think we can take 1 or 2 questions right here. You may have to go to the mic, I don't know.
Please.
Just so that it get captured in audio. Yeah.
Sure. So I'm sure you've taken this data and these messages to funders to draw money to organizations or causes that you're working with, and funders are majority old white men. How are those conversations going? What's the sort of like feedback that you're getting? You're presenting them all this interesting data that informs how to move minority communities. Are they listening? Are they sending money?
I mean, I'm gonna let Inse answer that question, but before I do, I have to say that part of the way we all came together is because we are part of a community brought together by a brilliant, forward-thinking funder, Julie Fernandez from the Rockefeller Family Fund, who created the Democracy and Power Innovation Fund to do just this type of research. And so it includes a community of funders who are committed to this type of research, but there's more to be done. So I don't know, and say you can speak to, like, as someone who was moving programs with an organization, of like what that looked like for you.
I mean, inertia, status quo, bias, right? All of these things are just difficult things that we need to organize around and go around. And also, I'm becoming more and more clear that funders are basically groupies. And so sort of trying to figure out what, like, how to make this sexy has definitely become a part of our work, and like sexy and interesting.
Or like literally sexy also in your case.
I mean, no, I have a line. It's organizing. We're organizing resources. It's not going to happen overnight. Like, it would be super easy for me to sit up here and shit on the like unsophisticated analysis of donor and donor advisors. I feel like everybody's doing the best that they can. I think that people are learning, and there's a shift, and we are overcoming sort of massive historical and institutional sort of challenges. You're talking about the Democratic Party, you're talking about presidential campaigns in the background, you're talking about massive attacks on democracy and state legislatures. You got a Supreme Court that, what is it, Moore versus Harper? Yes. That's a Supreme Court case that's coming up soon that could get rid of the Voting Rights Act, et cetera. And so there are a lot of people approaching this from different angles. We are part of an ecosystem, and I will just tell you that is a process. But, you know, many hands make the light work, and so more of us that are having these conversations and pushing folks to do better and be better and give better, I think the closer we get to where we're trying to be.
Right, so takeaway, if you are a funder or in a relationship with a funder, tell them, share our message, right? Right?
I want to answer that funder question.
Yeah,
too,
go for it.
Because I think the last thing you said there, Nsé, was my favorite part is give better, which is different than give more. Funders are beginning to recognize the imperative here because of their self-interest, because they're tired of losing. And they know that they are no longer winning. They're not going to win a majority of white voters. And so they're beginning to see the imperative in black and brown and diverse voters. But they bring their funding with their agenda and their strategy. They don't want to fund that, right? They want to fund it the way they want to do it. And so I get people every day asking HIT strategies to help them come up with a message that convinces black people to vote. It's a lot harder to find those funders that come to HIT strategies to make black people's lives better. They just want the message. They just want the silver bullet. Just give me the message that's going to get them to do what I want them to do. As opposed to a funder coming to me and saying, how do we make black people's lives better? Because that's not about a message.
Right. And making their lives better makes them have power, then that actually makes them vote. So, win-win for everybody.
And it's also not lying to people, right? About, listen, dude, the minimum wage in Georgia is $5.15. The federal minimum wage is $7.25. Americans haven't had a raise in like 13 years. Georgians haven't had a raise in almost 20 years. And so you can't look a working person in the face in Georgia and tell them that the power of the vote is going to materially change the conditions in their lives when they've been voting.
Right. That's real.
And the wages are still the same. Right? And so we have to have honest conversations about what it looks like to build power, have honest conversations about what the actual challenges are. And voting is a part of that. And we have to be honest about it, though, especially because I got to go back to those people.
That's right.
Yes. Some of these campaigns can come and you can lie and you can promise the whole world because you don't have to go back and knock on those doors.
That's right.
We do.
Right. All right. So you get the last word, which seems appropriate.
Indeed.
That's right.
So thank you all for coming to our panel and appreciate everybody. That's a wrap.
Thanks, everybody.